Welcome back everyone to the final video in my three-part epic review of the new World of Warcraft book War Crimes by Christie Golden. This is going to be my spoilerific review where I talk about the ramifications of what happens in the story, as well as my dislikes and my likes with full disclosure. So just as with the synopsis, this is going to have spoilers all over the place. Speaking of the synopsis video, if you're watching this one but for some reason haven't watched that one, I would suggest pausing this and going to watch or at least listen to that while you're doing something, because it is quite long at an hour, but I really don't see the point of listening to this spoiler opinion review without actually understanding the whole story. So, pause this video and go watch that one if you haven't. So let's get started. Like I said, before we get to the actual review, I think we need to address a few of the lore ramifications after all that happens. The first and most obvious one is how Garrosh escapes. We now see the manner in which Kairaz helps Garrosh escape, and that is through him using the Vision of Time. Also, interestingly, Rathian played his hand maybe a little even too unnecessarily and early, and revealed that he was also part of the plan. Or, at the very least, he was going to do something very similar to what Kairaz did, since technically we did not see a confirmation that Rathian was directly helping Kairaz and Garrosh escape. That's only what Anduin believes, and Anduin has a nasty track record of thinking he always knows what the actual answer is, or the true way people should believe, when in actuality he tends to just parrot Velen's philosophy. It is also possible, albeit unlikely, that Rathian had his own plans to free Garrosh, because I don't really see the point of them making a scene showing his bodyguards left and right knocking out the two guards in Garrosh's room when Garrosh was already out on the courtroom by Kairaz because the verdict was being read. It just didn't make much sense. But next, let's chat a bit about the Infinite Dragonflight, a very important, I guess, semi-revelation that we learn in the book. We've only simply known that the Infinites want to change history, but it has always been in ways that are detrimental to our own timeline. Thus, they have been painted with the brush of villainy, perhaps unfairly, and we learn from both Chromie and Kairaz there is a faction of the Bronze Dragons who, after losing their timeline omniscience, believe they should change time on what they think is best. Of course, as Chromie points out, best can be quite subjective, and thus then we see Kairaz helping Garrosh escape, which definitely isn't the best for anyone in the courtroom but Garrosh himself. It's pretty important that part of this revelation is the obvious connection to the Infinite Dragonflight. It's definitely clear that this is the beginning of them. But the real question is, are their creation the results of Rathian? Is the connection between Kairaz and Rathian that the Black Prince was the one who is responsible for transforming some of the Bronze Dragons into the Infinite Dragonflight? Let's recall what Rathian said in the past here though. We know his interest is in protecting Azeroth as a whole, and it's clear at this point that his methods of doing so don't necessarily line up with our best interest as mortals on the planet. After he tries to accomplish this goal, first with the Horde, and then the Alliance after Garrosh causes a civil war in his own faction, he then tells the players he will be more directly taking control next time. And what better way could he do that than with his own personal contingent of time-traveling dragons? We don't know enough yet about Kairaz, but I'm confident in saying it seems quite unlikely that he is the deep mastermind behind all of this and has created the plan on his own. Rathian seems much more likely as the culprit based on what we know he wants to do and what we've seen him do in the past. And going by this assumption, we can establish the connection between Rathian and Kairaz's groups because Zayla and her forces are riding the Infinite Dragons, and they're doing so willingly. The Infinite Dragons are not enslaved. That's a point that needs to be reiterated. The Infinite Dragons are not enslaved by Warlord Zayla and the Dragon Maw. They are willingly participating in the fight. But then again, how would Nozdormu factor into all of this? Even though the Aspect's power is almost gone, I still really don't think Rathian would be able to manipulate Nozdormu, who we do know becomes the leader of the Infinite Dragonflight Murozond at some point. While we are seeing the beginnings, or the potential beginnings, of the Infinite Dragonflight, we still are going to need more information before we can establish a more clear picture, but getting a little bit ahead of myself, I really love how the Infinite Dragonflight is brought back up. But they are so cool, I love them as a faction, and I'm so great and glad that they're getting their time in the lore again. So let's start off with the actual review, and I'm going to start out with my dislikes. As you probably have heard if you watched the spoiler-free review, I only really had one major dislike, and it was at the end of the story, and this is what I'm talking about. I think the biggest letdown of the entire book is the last 2 pages, not including the epilogue, where the August Celestials tell everybody that they already knew they were going to spare Garrosh the entire time. It was totally absurd, and the fact that Tyrande seemed like the only one who was pissed about it was annoying, to say the least. You can remove that entire scene and literally nothing is lost from the story. I don't know why Blizzard or Christie Golden, whoever decided to add this, needed to toss another stupid moral lesson from the August Celestials in our faces at the end. Frankly, it was an incredibly sour note on an otherwise fantastic story. Chi-Ji might have saved Jaina, but there were more than a few deaths during that final fight, especially people who were being killed by Thaylen Songweaver's mana bombs outside. I like how these creatures of apparent supposed wisdom and strength and tenacity and fortitude were just had no problem utterly sacrificing all these people to make that point. A point that, according to the Celestials themselves, Bane and Anduin had already understood before the fighting even began. You're telling me that if you had to have this moral scene in the book, you couldn't have had Bane or Anduin monologue about it at the end? Sure, it still would have been annoying, but it wouldn't have been as annoying and as absurd as the Celestials just standing there watching people in the crowd die so that at the very end when the fighting is over they can make some moral point. It just doesn't make sense, especially with someone like Chi-Ji whose goal is to try and prevent as much death as possible. I'll just say that I used to really find the August Celestials interesting, at least in the beginning of Mists of Pandaria. But after their appearances in 5.3 with Rathion's lessons they try to teach him, as well as their appearances in 5.4, I'm just sick of them. The point of them is very obvious, to be the moral center and provide a moral lesson. But how could Blizzard ever think they needed to do that 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 or more times throughout the course of the expansion and this story that concludes it? That's really my only issue. It just seemed entirely unnecessary, and it kind of felt like them smacking you in the face saying, remember Mists of Pandaria? Everything you think you feel about rage against the Horde or rage against the Alliance is wrong and you should feel bad for feeling it. So that's my only true issue, but there are a few smaller points that, while maybe I didn't dislike, I found annoying, and I'm going to bring these up before I get to the likes. The first is about Jaina. Why did they need to push Jaina back to being all lovey-dovey again? Why couldn't they just have her hard but not insane? If that means Kalecgos leaves her, then who the hell cares? Their love story is ridiculous and stupid anyway. The Jaina scenes were great, and I think they were even better than in Tides of War when she was more in the moment of being hurt. When we see her in War Crimes, all of the events of Mists of Pandaria have happened, and she might have healed a little bit, but she still is very hurt and traumatized by what happens, and I think they really demonstrate it well, except when Kalecgos shows up and be's a morally righteous ass towards her, which he does in literally every scene in this book except for the very last one when she's dying. Okay, now let's get to Anduin. Anduin is just flat out annoying now. Bane is a great example of how to have a morally good character without making him a preachy douchebag. My problem with Anduin is that they have him lecture several characters not only in this book, not only in Tides of War, not only in Mists of Pandaria, not only in The Shattering, not only in Twilight of the Aspects, but all the time, and he lectures characters who are far more experienced and actually understand how the world of Azeroth works. Under any normal circumstances, without his insane plot armor, Anduin would be dead already. He needs to be captured in Warlords of Draenor by like the Shattered Hand for a little while and tortured a bit so he's not so goddamn morally pure and obnoxious. And to alleviate what I know is already a comment being made, I don't have a problem with morally good characters. I just mentioned Bane, but Anduin is naive to the point of absurdity. And again, yet they still have him lecturing other characters. I used to really like him. I kind of didn't mind his moral lecturing in The Shattering when he's first really introduced as a legitimate character and not a prop standing in Stormwind's throne room. But now, at this point where they seem to have no actual story for Anduin except him lecturing people, I would just be totally fine if he died. So, sorry, Anduin lovers out there. Next, let's get to Rathion. I really wish they would have left Rathion's participation in the freeing of Garrosh with just having his 2 bodyguards, left and right, helping incapacitate the guards and let him escape, and then not revealing anymore. Basically, I really wish they didn't have the scene where Anduin confronts Rathion, and then Rathion incapacitates him. It would have been nice for those of us who caught that to realize that it was Rathion, because up to this point in the story, they don't even mention the names left and right, which are the names of Rathion's bodyguards. They just say, oh, it was a woman and a female orc with crossbows. And those of us who know the lore and the story or paid attention in the game We know, it clicked in my head instantly, oh, those were Rathion's bodyguards. I wish they would have left it there and not have him play his hand so blatantly and so soon. And the reason is they lamented the fact that they announced the Garrosh as the final villain of Mists of Pandaria at the BlizzCon where they announced it. But unless they throw a huge curveball in the story, this book just kind of did it again with Rathion, who is very much implied to being behind all of this. So I'm kind of confused why they did that. Next, Tyrande having to defend Thrall by showing the end time would have happened if he didn't join the Earthen Ring was absolutely stupid. It's not like Thrall's testimony was going to just condemn Garrosh so much he would have been immediately executed. I don't understand why Tyrande had to defend Bane's knocking of his character by showing that scene. It felt like another unnecessary stroking of Thrall as a character, and it smacked completely of Metzen saying, Christy, you gotta put this scene in the book, make sure we all know Thrall's still super important. And finally, where the hell is Nosdormu? We get a huge reveal about the Infinite Dragonflight, and he's totally absent. He's not in the book whatsoever. He really needed to at least show up a little bit, at the end especially. I had actually thought the way they were going to resolve the alternate timeline portals and people showing up, like King Anduin and Crazy Caligos, was having Nosdormu show up and try and close them. And maybe he wouldn't have the power to do so, and then we see that it is in this moment that he realizes maybe the Infinite Dragonflight's way of doing things isn't necessarily wrong. Coincide that with his mate Sori Dormi dying, who we also don't see in the book, and I'm not sure then when we're going to see this episode happen, like we did in the Vision Quest chain in 5.4, because now we're on Pandaria, we're not going to the Caverns of Time. But, nope, nothing. Nosdormu doesn't show up, Sori Dormi is not there, the Bronze Dragonflight's not represented at all except for Chromie, who has a great moment and is pretty awesome in the book throughout, but still, where is their leader? I was willing to buy the logic that they made to defeat the alternate versions, which is convince themselves that you and them are the same and they'll disappear. It was pretty cheesy, but I was willing to buy it. I was still expecting Nosdormu to show up. So there you go. That's 5 little annoyances that I had, but they're not really huge points, just they irked me a little bit as I read them. So now let's get on to my likes. Basically take everything that I said I disliked, remove that from the book, and you get everything that I like. I loved every other part of this book. The novel finally knocked Arthas Rise of the Lich King from his position as my favorite Warcraft book. I know a lot of people didn't like the idea of a trial in the Warcraft universe, but I really did enjoy the callbacks in the trial through the evidence of the Vision of Time that they made to the other books, to the other games, to the other expansions. They reference, this is probably the biggest story where they reference all of the other lore thus far, and I really like that as a lore fan. Tyrande as well, she made me very, very happy as an Alliance player, excluding that little Thrall bit that I mentioned. She finally reminded me of the Warcraft 3 version of Tyrande, who wasn't a total doormat to Malfurion. She had some fight and fire inside of her, and I really miss this Tyrande, and I'm glad, even if she's not a major character in Warlords of Draenor or doesn't even show up, that we at least got to see a small amount of the old Tyrande again. Next, the Sylvanas and Varisa subplot. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. When I first read the spoilers about this subplot happening, I actually kind of really disliked the idea of it. I thought Varisa was being totally used by Sylvanas and was acting so stupidly. But as Christy Golden said on Twitter, context was everything. Sylvanas was still using her sister, but their interactions were far more nuanced and fascinating. And this is from someone, by the way, who very publicly hates the Banshee Queen. The scene where Sylvanas learns that Varisa has abandoned her and is on the ground crying and smacking the dirt with her fists is heartbreaking, and I was really feeling for that character in the moment. Which again is amazing because I hate Sylvanas. Next, I'm very happy that Zayla survived, and I really love that they brought Thaylen back into the story. I really hope 2 of them as well as Shokia show up in Warlords of Draenor, in some capacity at the very least. As well as in my spoiler-free review, I mentioned 2 characters who I was surprised they brought back, but thought they made a lot of sense. It was Thaylen and Harrowmiser. Harrowmiser was such out of left field. He wasn't on the radar whatsoever in my mind of what could else they be doing. Bringing Harrowmiser back was very odd, but a really cool and a choice that made a lot of sense. I definitely did not expect that to happen. Rounding up my list of likes, we then come to the infinite dragonflight that I've always spoken about already. I find them infinitely fascinating, excuse the pun, and I love any and all information about them we can get. I really hope, knowing that there is at least some bronze dragonflight involvement in the expansion, that they end up playing a larger role in the patches that we know thus far. But finally, let's talk about the very best part of the book. I covered it in my summary and my spoiler-free review. I mentioned it at the very end. The scene where Varian says, "And we have warlocks!" and the various races of the warlocks cheer and begin summoning their demons. It was just so great. So great. It was my favorite part of the book, and the Felguard saving Varian's ass was the icing on the cake. We also had the scene where the Night Elf Priestess heals Varian's wounds, which was also really cool. Basically, that entire scene was a love note to the players, and I thought it was perfect. I felt much more organic than the scene with players in Tides of War, with the freeing of Thalen and the accompanying of Jaina to Theramore. It was so great. I could picture my character, my warlock, in that moment doing what happened in the story. I thought this is the way they have to do it. This is the way, if you're going to connect players to the books, to the game, this was the perfect way to do it, and I'm so grateful and happy that they did. So, in conclusion, War Crimes is a fantastic expansion connecting experience. My only regret was the fact that either Christie Golden or Blizzard felt the need to club us over the head one final time with a moral lesson by the end by the Celestials. However, that one flaw is pretty vastly overshadowed by excellent characterizations, fascinating story progression, and a very epic fight scene at the end. But it does rely heavily on knowing the source material, so if you haven't read any of the other Warcraft novels, or haven't been keeping up with the universe's lore, you probably will be pretty lost with all of its callbacks. However, if you have been keeping up, spend the night with a glass of your favorite drink and enjoy the ride. There are applaud moments for both the Alliance and the Horde, and Christie Golden even managed to get me to care about one of the characters that I hate the most. If, like me, you were annoyed by the prospects of Warlords of Draenor and its premise, War Crimes will definitely tide you over until you can experience the full depth of Orcmania funtime in Orcland, and with the added side effect of learning how our friend Garrosh escapes. World of Warcraft War Crimes by Christie Golden earns a 4.75 out of 5, which is the highest score I have ever given a Warcraft book. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen, we have it, the War Crimes review. Thank you for listening, everybody. If you have any questions or you have read War Crimes and believe I've forgotten something or gotten something wrong, feel free to leave those in the comments below. Also, let me know what your favorite moments from the book are if you have read it. If you find this video entertaining or informative, feel free to like, favorite, leave a comment, and subscribe. But as I always say, if you really would like to help me out, the best way you can do that is by sharing this video in my channel with anybody you think would find it interesting or fascinating. I am always looking to introduce more people to this universe's rich lore, so if you're able to send people my way and let me help them experience the awesomeness of Warcraft, I'd be eternally grateful. Make sure to stay tuned to this channel for future Warlords of Draenor character videos, including Gul'dan and Ner'zhul, which will be coming next week and the week after that. They are both already completed, so don't worry, there's not going to be some gap of time. With World of Warcraft and a new expansion coming up, there is always new and more lore to explore, and new lore too. I forgot to mention new lore. I hope we can do that together because it is always more fun to geek out about lore together. As you can tell, I've been very animated in this review because War Crimes brought back my love of the Warcraft universe that I think I've lost some of with my dislike of Warlords. So I'm back a little bit. I've come back to my old ways. I'm hitting my microphone as I'm recording this. I'm keeping it all in because I don't even give a shit. But thanks again for watching, everyone. I hope to see you next time. And until then, farewell.